Hi there, it's Elliot. Before we get to the episode, I just wanted to squeeze in a quick mention about the Page Learning Lab, our new online learning program for communications professionals. Page and its members are charting the future of the profession, and the lab gives you access to their thinking, the most progressive thinking out there on topics ranging from comtech and journey communications to culture change, stakeholder capitalism, business skills, and DE&I. It's tailored learning designed to fit into your busy schedule. For more information, check it out at learning.page.org. Throughout his tenure at Merck, Ken Frazier made it a point to stand up for his principles. One of the most public examples is his decision to step down from then-President Donald Trump's Manufacturing Advisory Council, following Trump's remarks on the Charlottesville Unite the Right rally. Unlike most CEOs, Ken was once his company's CCO. That experience helped prepare him to think multi-stakeholder and pass decisions through the lens of the company's character and values. It also inspired him to always find opportunities to make, quote, good trouble, in the words of John Lewis, to agitate for change where it's needed. At the 2022 Page Spring Seminar, Ken sat down with industry icon and longtime Page member Bill Nielsen to discuss his leadership philosophy, his love for communications, and the role business can play in bettering society. I'm Elliot Mizrahi, and this is the new CCO.
You want to be on the left or the right?
I always want to be on the left. It's my life story.
Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. I want to tell you what a great pleasure it is to be here in person. I miss seeing all of you so much for such a long time. And this is a very important topic. I've been in this practice for coming up on 60 years. And looking back over history, I don't think there's ever been a time in the history of our profession where the role of the communications person has been so terribly important. And so we wanted to hear from an acknowledged authority in business management. And that's why we invited Ken, and he was so gracious to agree to come and be with us today. Now, his bio is, I think, accessible to you, and I don't want to take up too much time going through it, but I do want to just mention, for those of you who haven't seen it, that he is executive chairman of Merck's board of directors, and that's a role that began in last July, following his retirement from a decade-long tenure as Merck's president and chief executive officer. Under his leadership, Merck has delivered innovative life-saving medicines and vaccines, and he's developed long-term sustainable value. He joined the company in 1992 and held positions of increasing responsibility, including general counsel, before becoming president and CEO in 2011. And prior to joining Merck, he practiced law in Philadelphia. He went to Penn State University and got his law degree from Harvard Law School. So Ken, we are absolutely delighted to have you here today with us.
Thank you, Bill.
In this period of historic upheaval in society and business globally, strong, effective organizational leadership is key to managing into the future for business and society. And you have stated that you can relate to our theme, this radical relevance and the importance of strategic communications as a business essential. So would you care to comment on that? And do you view the role of the Chief Communications Officer as central to business success?
So let me start by thanking you, Bill, for inviting me here today and to share with everybody that Bill mentioned that I came from the practice of law in Philadelphia. One of my first jobs at Merck was this job. I tell people it was the most fun and the most fulfilling job that I ever had anywhere. And Bill Nielsen was my mentor. So everything I'm about to say, I learned from Bill, okay? If he wanted me to have an opinion, he would always give it to me. I do think the Chief Communications Officer is an incredibly important position in today's business world. The last panel basically explained why that is the case. We are living in a world in which never before has business been under the kind of close scrutiny with respect to its performance and with respect to its values as they are today. And I think that the challenge that the chief communications officer has, and the single most important thing that you do, is to not represent the company to the outside world. It is to help represent the outside world to the company. We CEOs are surrounded by people who tell us how great we are. You know, my jokes were never as funny as they were before I became CEO. And it's important that there be somebody who's in that room, who's about to challenge me, challenge my perspectives, challenge my executive team's perspective, and help us to understand what our different stakeholders expect of us. It's not easy in a hyper-partisan, hyper-politicized world that we live in. Whatever position you take, or whether you choose not to take a position, you are always going to offend someone. But you need someone who's going to help you understand what it is that you can communicate and what is it that you can do that is consistent and complementary with the company's core values. Couldn't be more important than it is right now.
So you see the CCO as a true partner of the CEO in the management mix?
Yes, absolutely. So my colleague, Crystal Downing, is over there. She's Merck's chief communications officer. And I often say to her, your job, and I'm using John Lewis's phrase, is to cause good trouble inside the company. You know, because often when it comes to taking a stand on an issue, there are three things that the business people know intuitively. That these are issues that are difficult, they're complicated, and if you take the wrong position, it can cost you from a reputation standpoint and a financial standpoint. So people want to go out on that limb only when they have assurance that it's the right thing for their company over the long term. And that last panel, there was a little bit of an exchange in that last panel, and I thought it was something that really is really important, and that is the relevance and the importance of data. I always say data plus transparency equals trust. And so for those of us who can bring, and Richard Edelman has been instrumental in bringing around the trust barometer to give us a lot more data, and of course we are all capable of getting data as it relates to the issues and that relate to our business. I think that's really important because otherwise people think, well, that's your opinion. We get into this argument about whether or not the outside world has a particular perspective. Mm-hmm. So that's data plus transparency, I think, equals trust.
Well, you have been lauded for transformational leadership both inside and outside of Merck, and you have stated that the important thing about leadership is that it needs to be anchored around principle or principles. And I assume that you're referring to organizational as well as personal principles.
Absolutely.
Let's talk about leadership
mostly organizational
during these times.
Right.
Yeah. What have you learned that could be helpful in terms of the importance of principles in organizations, both for-profit and not-for-profit?
So, you know, when you're given a position of leadership in an organization, nonprofit or profit, I think one of the most important things for leaders is to be somewhat introspective. And the question I asked myself when I became the CEO of Merck were two questions. Number one, why should Merck people grant me the gift of their followership? And then secondly, why should they share and adopt my dreams, my visions, my ambitions, my goals? When I asked myself those questions, the answer was because I am vindicating a series of values that have been core to Merck for a long time. In other words, I have no right to come to people to tell them what they should think about political issues. I have no right to go to my people and tell them what values we should have as a company. But as long as I'm standing firmly on the values that attracted them to Merck and have caused them to come and remain at Merck, then I've always felt very secure. Whether I was talking about an issue inside the company that was hard, and there are lots of trade-offs inside the company, or whether I was addressing an issue to the outside world. If I felt that I could come back to principles that Merck had always taken and established, then I felt I was on solid ground.
Yeah, I think particularly in this time when public trust is at 0 point, and we're trying to reestablish public trust, that it starts first with values, and that it then becomes performance against those values, that people can make judgments, but also can become more trusting of organization.
Bill, you said years ago that the CCO is the conscience of the company. Mm. And I happen to think that's an important aspect. I don't think, hopefully, you're not the only person of conscience in the company, okay? That's a hard job, to the lady's question back there a few minutes ago. That's a really uphill climb. But I think there's two things. Number one, as I just finished talking about, the importance of values and principles. But the second thing is this business of conscience. That is, we all have stated values, right? In the United States, we have certain stated values. The question is, are our behaviors consistent with those stated values? That's conscience. It's the conscience that points to our behaviors, our strategies, our words, and says, are those consistent and complementary, what we say we believe in, right? I'm a lawyer, right? So one of the things that I do, I chair the Legal Services Council. I go around and I talk to people about the fact that we have these words on the Supreme Court about equal justice under law. And then you look at how many Americans can't afford to be represented, and they can be thrown out of their houses. They can have their children taken away from them. They can be put into an institution with no representation. How is that consistent? That's the conscience thing that we need to do. We need to make sure that if we say we believe in certain things, is our company behaving consistent with that?
And I really think we need to remember that the role of the Chief Communications Officer is probably the most horizontal role in an organization, probably except for the CEO. But I had the privilege of working for a CEO who really understood that and empowered me to keep looking horizontally to judge the conscience all the time of whether or not business performance was consistent with the values that were expressed in our credo. And there is a very important role for agencies, Richard, in this in consulting agreement. And when I took over there, I went to every agency we worked with, and I said, you need to understand what our values are, and I expect you to be looking at even the furthest most reaches of our company to see that behavior is consistent. And if you don't, with our values, if you don't see that, you need to be reporting that in to us so that we can do that. I really think that's an important part of the CCO's job. Obviously, it's not something you can do all by yourself, but you need to empower people on staff who are able to do that. I think that was part of your culture as well at Merck in guarding behavior.
I agree. I think we should ask some of the hard questions, though. I mean, the question a few minutes ago about, well, what do you do if your management doesn't agree with the position? That's the challenge at the end of the day. Whether the management agrees with it substantively or whether the management is saying, I don't want to stick my neck out on this issue. Those are the hard issues inside. And even when you're a CEO, which, by the way, is an overrated experience, you still answer to stakeholders. You answer to your board. You answer to your customers. You answer to your employees. We've seen that recently where CEOs have been called upon to apologize because they didn't take a position consistent with what their employees thought they ought to take. So these are really hard issues, and that's where having a conversation with a really good chief communications officer helps. I've had them save me from myself many times.
Yeah. Let's talk a little bit about society in general. Survey after survey shows public's loss of trust in almost everything. And the degree of polarization on issues such as immigration, policing policy, racial equity, gun legislation, healthcare reform, climate change, and others is very startling and disarming. What are the steps you think we should be considering to bring society back to greater unity. We have seen evidence, Rich Edelman's survey, that trust in business is actually growing. And is that an opportunity for us?
I really think it is. When you look at our society, we are so politically divided today. Most of us, if we think about it, live in enclaves surrounded by people that are like us. As a result, our children, if they go to public schools generally or private schools that are proximate, they go to school with people that are not different from them, right? We go to church or synagogue or mosque with people who believe what we believe. And importantly, we can tune into broadcast media or social media where the opinions are exactly the same as ours. And it's a reinforcing mechanism. Business is the last place where people cannot choose to associate only with people who are like them and who believe what they believe. It's the last place. And I think it's important for us in business to recognize the role of business to bring people together. I've taken some positions publicly that have gotten me criticized, but I felt it was really important inside the company to actually, for example, withdrawing from the president's business council. It was important for me to establish that many of my employees voted for President Trump. And I needed to make sure they understood that I wasn't judging them. I wasn't calling them a bunch of ignoramuses or a bunch of racists, because I realized that President Trump represented more than his comments about Charlottesville to them. At the same time, I want to be absolutely clear, I could not live staying on that business council after what the president did not say. And so by acknowledging their beliefs, I could therefore say, you need to acknowledge my beliefs. I think the challenge we have in our society is that people on both sides of the spectrum are driving the political discourse in our company. Now, I don't want to bore you, but when I was in college, I had this political science professor who was from Eastern Europe. He's probably dead. His name was Professor Albinski. And he used to say a thing about American politics is that it's boring because unlike European politics, it's all centrist. That's no longer true about American politics. And so when you take a position on things like voting rights, and we had a full page ad, 700 business people. If anybody reads that ad couldn't be more anodyne. The words in that ad said things like, we should all support democracy. Who doesn't believe in that, right? That if we believe in democracy, we have to believe that we want to make